The wedding cake was 6 tiers tall, frosted in ivory and gold, and shaped like a promise that everyone in the room already knew was a lie. Rosario Conti sat at the head of the ballroom in a custom Italian tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars, his hands resting on the wheels of a chair that he had never, not once in 4 years, allowed anyone to push for him. The Palazzo Venetian in Las Vegas was sold out for the occasion. 500 guests, 2 senators, a federal judge who owed Rosario a favor he could never repay. Enough floral arrangements to bury a small country. The chandeliers alone had been imported from Milan. The champagne was older than most of the waitstaff. And the bride was gone. Not late, not nervous in the back room with her mother. Gone, as in her entire suite emptied, her Louis Vuitton luggage missing, and a single note left on the pillow of the honeymoon bed. A pillow she had never slept on, in a room she had visited exactly once, to ensure the thread count met her standards. The note said, "I deserve someone who can actually stand up for me. Valentina." Rosario had read it twice. Then he had folded it precisely in half, placed it in the breast pocket of his tuxedo, and wheeled himself back to the ballroom, where 500 people were beginning to suspect that something was very, very wrong. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed too loudly. Because Rosario Conti, in a good mood, was a man you treated carefully, the way you treat a loaded weapon you found in a stranger's coat. And Rosario Conti in a bad mood was something people in this city had learned not to witness if they could help it. He sat at the center of the room, like a king who had just watched his castle burn. His jaw was set. His dark eyes scanned the crowd with the cold, systematic precision of a man who had spent 30 years in a world where weakness was an invitation. Nobody spoke to him. Not his capo Marco, who stood 6'4" and had once broken a man's arm for interrupting Rosario mid-sentence. Not his consigliere, Father Aldo, who had blessed 2 of Rosario's enemies before they disappeared. Not a single person in that room of 500 powerful, dangerous, wealthy human beings moved toward the man in the wheelchair. That was when Rosa Delgado dropped the tray. It was not her fault, technically. One of the younger waiters, a boy of maybe 19, who had clearly never worked an event at this level, had cut directly across her path while she was carrying a full arrangement of champagne flutes toward table 7. The collision was inevitable. The sound was spectacular. Crystal exploded across the marble floor like a small, expensive thunderstorm. Champagne splashed across the legs of 2 women in designer gowns who shrieked as though they had been shot. Every head in the room turned, including Rosario's. Rosa Delgado was 43 years old, 5'3", and built as her late mother had always said with great affection, like a woman who had never met a problem she could not feed her way through. She was wearing the standard hotel catering uniform, white button-down, black slacks, non-slip shoes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a bun that had been losing the battle against gravity since approximately 11 that morning. There was champagne on her left sleeve. There were approximately 498 pairs of eyes on her face. She did not run. She did not cry. She did not apologize 14 times in a row the way the 19-year-old boy beside her was currently doing to no one in particular. She looked down at the shattered glass, took a slow breath, and said quietly and only to herself, "Okay, Rosa, not the worst thing that has happened today." She did not know, of course, about the note. She did not know about the bride. She knew only what any good catering staff member knows. That broken glass on a ballroom floor is a safety hazard. That her supervisor Angela was going to have an aneurysm, and that the most powerful man in the room was now looking directly at her. She looked back at him. Most people, when Rosa Conti looked at them that way, flat and still, like a man deciding the value of a thing, dropped their eyes immediately. It was a survival instinct. Rosa held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Not out of bravado, but because she was trying to determine whether he was sitting close enough to the glass that she needed to route her cleanup around him. Then she pulled a folded cloth from her apron pocket, crouched down with the careful movement of a woman whose knees had been complaining since her late 30s, and began to collect the largest pieces of crystal by hand. "Miss," one of the hotel managers materialized beside her, hissing in a whisper designed to be invisible. Leave it right now, and go to the back. Someone is going to step on it," Rosa said without looking up. "Someone will handle it. You need to—" "I am handling it." She placed another shard carefully in the cloth. "Hand me the small broom from the station behind you, please." The manager stared at her. Rosario Conti was still watching. The manager handed her the small broom. Rosa worked quickly and thoroughly, sweeping the area in neat overlapping strokes the way her mother had taught her, the way she had taught her own daughter. When she stood, she turned to the two women with champagne on their gowns and said with genuine calm, "I am so sorry about your dresses. If you give them to the front desk before midnight, we will have them dry cleaned at the hotel's expense, no charge." The women blinked. That was not the response they had been preparing themselves to be outraged at. Rosa gathered the cloth with the glass, tucked it under her arm, picked up the unbroken flutes that had rolled to safety, reassembled her tray, and walked towards table 7. She passed within 10 feet of Rosario Conti. He said nothing. She said nothing. But as she passed, she glanced at him once more, not the way people looked at him. Not with fear or calculation or the specific hunger of someone who wanted something from him. She looked at him the way you look at someone sitting alone at a party and recognize, without saying a word, that they are having the worst night of their lives. Just recognition, nothing more. She kept walking. Rosario watched her go. Marco appeared at his shoulder. "Boss, we should go. This is find out her name," Rosario said. Marco blinked. "The maid? The woman who just did the only competent thing I have seen in this room all evening." He turned away from the crowd, toward the window, toward the Las Vegas skyline burning gold and indifferent in the dark. "Her name, before we leave." Marco said nothing. He had worked for Rosario Conti for 11 years. He had learned in that time that there were two kinds of interest Rosario took in people, the kind that ended careers, and the kind that changed lives. He was not sure yet which this was, but he went to find out her name. Her name was Rosa Delgado, and she had been working catering events at the Palazzo Venetian for 7 years, 3 months, and by her own private count maintained in a small notebook she kept in her locker, approximately 14 days. She kept the count not because she was miserable, but because she was a woman who believed in knowing exactly where she stood, at all times, in every room. She learned this from her father, a man who had come to this country from Sonora, Mexico with $40, a trade school certificate in electrical work, and an absolute refusal to be surprised by anything. He had raised Rosa to be practical, precise, and deeply and almost stubbornly unimpressed by wealth. "Mija," he had told her once, when she was 12, and had come home wide-eyed from a birthday party at a rich classmate's house, "Nice things do not make nice people. They just make it easier to be cruel without noticing." Rosa had remembered this. She had remembered it through a marriage that started well and ended badly, through raising her daughter Lucia mostly alone after her husband Eddie left for a woman who did not, as he had explained with breathtaking honesty, remind him of his responsibilities. She had remembered it through her mother's illness, through 2 jobs at once, through Lucia's scholarship applications, and her own night classes toward the hospitality management degree she was 14 credits from completing. She was not, by any definition she accepted, a woman to be pitied. She was, however, a woman to be underestimated. This happened constantly, and she had made a kind of peace with it. Her supervisor Angela called her reliable, in the tone of voice that meant unimaginative. The younger staff called her Tia Rosa, Aunt Rosa, not entirely as a compliment. Her co-worker Brenda, who was 26 and very pretty, and deeply certain of the importance of both these facts, had once said to Rosa within earshot, "She is sweet, but like nobody looks at Rosa." Rosa had heard this. She had continued folding napkins. She was thinking about this, not bitterly but factually, the way you think about weather, when she pushed her cart past the Palazzo's service corridor at 11:47 that night, and heard the voice. It was low, controlled, precise, and absolutely furious. Not loud, that was the thing about it. Men who were truly dangerous, Rosa had observed over 43 years of life, were rarely loud. Loud was for men who needed volume, because their actual presence was not enough. This voice did not need volume. "If you tell me one more time that this is being handled, Caruso, I will have you handled in a way that will require a significant amount of paperwork." Rosa's cart had a squeaky left wheel. She had reported it 4 times. Facilities had not fixed it. It chose this exact moment to announce itself. The voice stopped. Rosa stopped. A door to her left, marked Private Hotel Management, was 3 inches open. She could see through the gap the edge of a wheelchair, and the edge of a man in an ivory and gold tuxedo. She should have kept walking. She was very aware of this fact. Instead, because the cartwheel had already given her away, and standing frozen outside a door was somehow worse than acknowledging the situation, she said through the gap, "Sorry, cart needs a new wheel. I reported it in August. A pause. "Come in," Rosario said. This was not, strictly speaking, a request. Rosario pushed the door open, cart and all, and found herself in a small conference room that the hotel used for VIP overflow. Rosario Conti was by the window. A phone was in his hand. Marco, the large man she had noticed earlier, was standing against the wall with the expression of someone who had long ago accepted that his job description included everything up to and including situations like this one. Rosario looked at her with those flat, dark eyes. In the light of the conference room, she could see that he was younger than she had thought from across the ballroom, mid-40s maybe, and the lines around his mouth were not laugh lines. "You work this event," he said. "Catering staff." "I was finishing breakdown." She glanced at the cart. "I will be out of your way in." She was also not sure, looking at his face, that he was entirely sure why he was telling her this. It had the quality of a confession made to a stranger on an airplane. The words that come out because the person you are looking at is going to disappear in the morning, and therefore it costs nothing. "I heard," she said honestly. "I am sorry. Are you?" "For the humiliation, yes. For the marriage not happening." She stopped herself. His eyes sharpened. "Finish it." Rosa looked at him for a moment. The sensible thing, the thing her 7 years, 3 months and approximately 14 days of working in this industry had taught her, was to say she had misspoken and leave. She said, "From what I have heard about you, Mr. Conti, the woman who just left you made one good decision tonight, and it might be the most honest thing to happen at this wedding." The room went very quiet. Marco made a sound that was not quite a word. Rosario Conti stared at her, and then slowly something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. More like a man who had just been surprised to discover that something was real when he had assumed it was decorative. "Nobody speaks to me that way," he said. "I know," Rosa said. "I can tell by the look on your bodyguard's face that I have either just ended my career or my general well-being." She tucked her hands in her apron pockets. "But you told me something honest, so I told you something honest back. It seemed fair." "Fair," he repeated, as though the word were in a language he had once studied but rarely used. "I should go," Rosa said. "My head of security found something tonight," Rosario said. The shift in his voice was absolute. The briefly cracked door of something personal had shut, and in its place was the voice of the man 500 people had been afraid to approach. In the kitchen, someone tampered with the catering staff's access credentials 40 minutes before the reception was scheduled to begin. Rosa's stomach dropped 2 inches. "3 members of my security team are currently reviewing footage," he continued. "Someone wanted access to this ballroom tonight, using a catering uniform as cover. Someone who is not a caterer." His eyes moved to her face with a precision that felt physical. "Where were you at 8:15 tonight, Miss Delgado?" She heard her name, and understood that the conversation had changed entirely. "I was in the prep kitchen," she said slowly, "with 6 other people. You can check the footage." "We are checking the footage," he paused. "One of your co-workers is not where they said they were." The cartwheel squeaked as Rosa's grip tightened on the handle without her meaning it to. "Which one?" she asked. Rosalie looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said, "is the right question. The name on the false credential was Daniel Rourke. The face attached to it belonged to a man Rosa had seen every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 years at the community college she attended for her hospitality management classes. He sat 2 rows behind her in event operations. He had borrowed her notes twice. He had once told her, pleasantly, that she was a natural in the field, and should consider a career in hotel management. She had thanked him and forgotten about it. She remembered it now with the sudden sickening clarity of a detail that had been sitting in plain sight waiting. "He was there tonight," she said. "I saw him in the prep corridor around 6. I thought..." She stopped. "He told me he had just started with the staffing agency. I thought it was a coincidence." Marco had his phone out. Rosario's eyes had not moved from her face. "What did he say to you?" Rosario asked. "Nothing unusual. He asked about the event layout, where the main table was positioned. I told him I did not know the full setup, and he should check with the floor manager." Rosario's hands had gone very still. "I did not think anything of it. It was a normal question for a new staff member." "He asked about the main table," Rosario repeated very quietly. "Yes." The word landed in the room like a stone in still water, and the ripples moved across Rosario's face. Not fear. Not the face of a man who was afraid. Something colder and more deliberate. The face of a man who was rearranging information the way a chess player rearranges a board, and seeing for the first time the true shape of the game. "Marco," he said. "Already calling it in," Marco said. Rosa understood. standing in that conference room with her cleaning cart, that she had walked into the middle of something that had nothing to do with a wedding, that the bride leaving might not have been a coincidence, that the broken champagne flutes and the bad cartwheel and her own inability to simply keep walking past a 3-inch gap in a door placed her at the exact center of something she did not yet fully understand. She was also, if she was honest with herself, not as frightened as she probably should have been. This was a personality trait her ex-husband had found deeply irritating. "Mr. Conti," she said, "if this man was placed here to get to you tonight, and you have now removed yourself from the ballroom, where are the rest of your guests?" Rosario looked at her. "Because a ballroom full of people," Rosario said carefully, "who do not yet know that the threat has been identified, that is still a very accessible room." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Rosario said to Marco, "Clear the room, medical emergency protocol, no panic." Marco was already moving. Rosa looked at Rosario. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately name. Not quite respect, not quite suspicion, but something between the two that had the quality of a door opening very slightly in a very old wall. "You think fast," he said. "I have worked events for 7 years, Rosario. You learn to see the whole room, not just your section. That is not a skill they teach in catering school." "No," Rosa said. "My father taught me. He said, always know where the exits are, always know who is near them, and always notice the thing that does not fit." He was an electrician, but the advice works in most rooms. Rosa was quiet for a moment. What did not fit, tonight, before any of this? Rosa thought. She thought the way she had learned to think, methodically, without editing herself toward the answer she assumed was wanted. "The bride's mother," she said. "She was the calmest person at this wedding. I have worked a lot of weddings. The mother of the bride is never calm. She is ecstatic, or she is controlling, or she is crying, or she is drunk. Mrs. Ferrara was none of those things. She was composed, like someone waiting for a specific time to arrive." The expression on Rosario's face shifted completely. "Valentina's mother," he said, and his voice had gone to a place below quiet, below controlled. A place that was almost toneless, which Rosa understood instinctively was the most dangerous register he had. "I could be wrong," Rosa said. "I am a catering server. I read rooms for tips." "You are not wrong," Rosa said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Valentina did not leave on her own." Rosa said nothing. She waited the way she had learned to wait. Still, present, without filling the silence with noise. "Her mother made a deal," Rosario said slowly, as though he were working through it as he spoke. "With the people who want me to not be alive past this evening. Get Valentina out of the building. Get me isolated, humiliated, distracted." He looked at his hands, at the wheels of the chair, at the hands that had built an empire from a neighborhood in South Philadelphia, and $200 borrowed from a man who was now afraid to ask for it back. Grieving.
"That is a complicated plan," Rosa said. "I am a complicated man to kill."
Rosa looked at him. 43 years old, tired in a way she understood. A man who had been handed in a single evening. The revelation that the woman he intended to marry had been used as a weapon against him, and who was processing this information with the kind of controlled stillness that she recognized. Not from the world he came from, but from her own life. The stillness of someone who had learned very young that falling apart was a luxury they could not afford. "Are you hurt?" she asked. The question surprised even her. It came out simply, without strategy. He looked at her as though the question were in a foreign language. "Not physically," he said. "I know," Rosa said. "That is not what I asked." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Outside the door she could hear the muffled sounds of Marco's operation beginning. Gentle, efficient, professional. The ballroom clearing like water draining from a basin. Rosario Conti looked out the window at the Las Vegas skyline, and for just one moment in which he seemed to forget that she was there, something passed through his face that was not armor, not calculation, not the expression of a man who had never allowed himself to be seen without them. It was grief, plain, human, unglamorous grief. Rosa looked away, giving him the dignity of the moment. When he spoke again, his voice was exactly as controlled as before. "I need to ask you to stay in this building tonight, Miss Delgado, for your safety, and because you are now a material witness to." "I have a daughter," Rosa said. He paused. "She is 17. She is home alone." Rosa met his eyes. "I need to call her and tell her I will be late, and I need to know she is safe. Can your people—" "Already done," Marco said from the doorway. He looked at Rosa with an expression that had migrated over the past 40 minutes from polite suspicion to something approaching reluctant respect. "Address," Rosa told him. Marco relayed it quietly into his earpiece. She looked at Rosa. "Thank you. You noticed what my entire security team missed," Rosario said. "It is a fair exchange."
"I noticed because nobody looks at the help," Rosa said simply, without bitterness. "I have been standing in rooms watching important people for 7 years. We see everything. We just do not get asked." Rosario was quiet for a moment. "I am asking now," he said. What Rosa told him over the next 2 hours, reconstructed from 7 years of watching and the sharp, specific memory of a woman who had trained herself never to stop paying attention, turned out to be more than enough. She had seen Valentina Ferrara's mother make 3 phone calls between 6 and 8 that evening. Not unusual in itself, but each call was made not in the ladies' room or the lobby, where guests typically retreated for privacy, but in a maintenance corridor on the building's east side, behind the floral staging area. Rosa had noticed because she had been pulling a cart through that corridor twice, and each time Mrs. Ferrara had stopped talking, stepped away from the wall, and smiled pleasantly until Rosa passed. The smile of someone who needed her to pass. She had seen the young man, Daniel Rourke, speaking briefly with one of the event photographers. Not taking pictures, not moving with the pack of photographers, but standing close, looking at the man's camera screen, pointing at something on it. Looking at the room layout, as captured from above. She had seen a woman she did not recognize in a staff uniform arrive through the service entrance at 7:45, carrying a case that was the wrong shape for catering equipment. She had assumed it was for the band. She described it now. The shape, the size, the color, the way the woman held it slightly away from her body. And she watched Marco photograph the description into his phone, with an expression that had gone from reluctant respect to something much more serious. "That is a disassembled rifle case," Marco said to Rosario. The room was quiet. Rosa processed this information the way she processed most information. Directly, without the luxury of denial. Someone had brought a rifle into this building. The wedding she had spent 12 hours preparing for had been, from multiple angles and by multiple actors, a carefully constructed trap. And she had walked her cleaning cart right through the middle of it. "The woman," Rosario said. "Where did she go after she came through the service entrance?" "Up," Rosa said. "She took the service elevator. I did not see which floor because I needed to get back to the kitchen. We were behind on the champagne service." She paused. "But she pressed a button. Top floor. The Venetian suite level." Marco was already on the phone. Rosario looked at Rosa. She had sat down. He had pointed at a chair 45 minutes ago, and she had, after a brief argument with herself about the strange intimacy of sitting down in the presence of a man she did not know, sat. She was sitting now with her hands folded on the table, steady and precise, the way she sat in her night classes when she was working through a problem that required full attention. "You were not afraid," he said. Not as a compliment exactly, but as an observation. The kind a scientist makes about something that does not behave the way the model predicts. "I am afraid," Rosa said. "I am sitting very still, because if I move too much, you will see my hands shaking." He looked at her hands. They were, in fact, very slightly unsteady. Something in his face changed. Not softened, that is too simple a word, but something structural in his expression adjusted, recalibrated. The way a building shifts when the foundation settles more honestly. "You could have left," he said. "The moment I told you about the credential, you could have walked out, claimed ignorance, and been clear of all of this." "I could have," Rosa agreed. "But you were sitting here by yourself, and someone was trying to kill you, and I—" She stopped. "I was raised that you do not leave someone alone when they are in danger. It does not matter who they are." "Even a man in my line of work. My father worked in neighborhoods where people were afraid of men like you," Rosa said honestly. "He was not one of them, and neither am I." But I also know that being dangerous to some people does not mean you deserve to be murdered at your own wedding. Rosario looked at her for a long time. "What do you want?" he said finally. The question was not paranoid. It was the question of a man for whom this was a legitimate mystery. A person doing something for him without a visible ledger of expected return. "Right now?" Rosa said. "A cup of coffee. I have been on my feet since 5 this morning, and it is now," she checked her phone, 2:17 in the morning, and I still have not been allowed to change out of this uniform. A beat of silence, and then Rosario Conti laughed. It was a short sound, not quite polished, not quite finished. The laugh of a man who had not done it in long enough that the mechanism was a little stiff. But it was real. Marco appeared in the doorway. "We have a Venetian suite, level 12. Also picked up 2 others in the parking structure. Mrs. Ferrara is being contained." He glanced at Rosa, seemed to decide something, and looked back at his employer. "She is clean, boss. Footage confirms everything she said, plus 2 things she did not mention that actually back up her account further." Rosario nodded. Marco disappeared. "You passed," Rosario said to Rosa. "I am not sure I was taking a test," Rosa said. "You were," he said. "Everything is a test in my world. Most people fail because they want something. The ones who tell you what they want are better than the ones who do not. But the rarest kind," he paused, "are the ones who do not want anything except what is right in front of them." Rosa considered this. "I want the degree I am 14 credits from completing. I want my daughter to get into a good school. I want the squeaky wheel on my cart to be fixed." She looked at him evenly. "Those are modest ambitions for someone who apparently just helped dismantle an assassination plot." "Most ambitions worth having are modest," Rosario said quietly, and in his voice was something she heard clearly. Not a man speaking to a woman who interested him. Not a powerful person acknowledging a useful subordinate. Something rarer than both. A person, simply, telling another person a truth they had held for a long time, without an appropriate audience. The night outside had shifted. It was the hour when Las Vegas becomes briefly and improbably quiet. The tourists asleep, the casinos momentarily still, the desert dark, returning for its few hours of sovereignty before the neon lit it back up again. "Mr. Conti," Rosa said, "is it over?" "The immediate situation," he said. "Yes. The rest of it." He looked at his hands. "No, it is rarely over in my line of work." Rosa nodded. She stood, straightening her jacket, tucking a loose strand of hair back toward the battle her bun was losing. She was about to reach for her card. "Miss Delgado," Rosario said. She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression she could not name entirely. It had components she recognized: exhaustion, calculation, gratitude stripped of performance. But at the center of it was something she had not expected to see on the face of a man described in federal documents as one of the 15 most dangerous individuals on the eastern seaboard. It looked, almost, like loneliness. "You said earlier," he started. He stopped. He tried again, with the careful deliberateness of a man approaching a language he did not use professionally. "You looked at me like someone having the worst night of his life." "I did not say that," Rosa said. "I thought it." "Yes." He paused. "It was the first time anyone in that room tonight saw me, rather than the chair, or the power, or the name." He looked down and then back up. "I have not been seen in a very long time." Rosa stood still. "I told Valentina once," he said, "that I wanted to dance at our wedding. She said—" He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. "She said a lot of things that I understand differently now." The room was very quiet. "Can a person in a wheelchair dance?" Rosa asked. Rosario looked at her. "I mean, actually," she said. "I am asking sincerely. I do not know." "Not the way people picture it," he said. "But," he looked at his hands, "there are ways." Rosa looked at him for a long moment. She was a practical woman. She was a tired woman. She was a woman with champagne on her left sleeve, a cart with a squeaky wheel, a daughter who was probably asleep with her phone on her stomach, and 14 credits left on a degree that was going to change the shape of the next 20 years. She was not a woman who did impractical things. She reached over to the small Bluetooth speaker on the conference table that someone had left there for a presentation that clearly had not happened tonight, connected it to her phone, and found in her playlist the song her father had danced with her mother to at every family gathering until the year her mother got sick. It was an old song, slow and Spanish, and entirely unapologetically emotional. She held out her hand. "Shall we dance?" she said. Rosario Conti looked at her hand. He looked at her face, and she could see him working through it. The strangeness of it, the impracticality, the sheer unexpectedness of this moment in this room after this night. And then she watched him decide. He took her hand. 3 months later, Rosa Elena Delgado walked across the stage at Nevada Community College and accepted her hospitality management degree from a woman who mispronounced her last name but shook her hand with genuine warmth regardless. In the third row, Lucia stood on her chair and cheered with a volume that was almost certainly a violation of the ceremony's decorum guidelines. Beside Lucia, silent and impeccably dressed, and attracting the quietly panicked attention of 3 security staff members who could not identify him, Rosario Conti applauded. He did not stand. He did not need to. Rosa found them after the ceremony, still in her gown, clutching the rolled diploma with both hands, the way Lucia had once clutched a stuffed rabbit. Not because it required holding, but because she needed to feel that it was real. "Mum," Lucia said, wrapping her arms around her in the way that still, at 17, was entirely without self-consciousness. "Mum, Mum, Mum." "Okay," Rosa said, laughing, pressing her face into her daughter's hair. I know. When she looked up, Rosario was watching them. He had that look on his face again, the one she had first seen through a 3-inch gap in a conference room door. The one he had gotten better at not hiding over the course of 3 months, that had moved like water over stone, quietly and with enormous pressure. The face of a man encountering something ordinary and finding it extraordinary. "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you for coming," Rosa said. She meant it simply. He had asked 2 weeks earlier if he could. The question had been delivered with the careful, deliberate formality of a man handling something he did not want to damage by being clumsy with it. She had said yes, because she had learned in 3 months that his formality was not coldness. It was the manners of a man who had never been taught the informal language of ordinary kindness and was trying to learn it late. The aftermath of the wedding night had been substantial by any measure. Elena Ferrara had been arrested. Daniel Rourke and the others were in federal custody. The network behind the attempt, 4 layers deep, with roots in 2 families Rosario named in a conversation with federal prosecutors that Rosa was not present for and did not ask about, had been significantly disrupted. Valentina, it emerged, had not known about the assassination plot. Her departure had been engineered by her mother under the cover of a manufactured ultimatum. She had called Rosario once, from somewhere, to say she was sorry. He had taken the call. Rosa did not ask what he had said. She had not asked, in 3 months, for many things. She had gone back to work. She had completed her credits. She had had Sunday dinner with Lucia and begun tentatively to imagine the next version of her life. Not the cautious accountant's version she had constructed in her mid-30s, where every possibility was evaluated against the cost of its failure, but the other version. The the one that took into account the possibility that something unexpected might turn out to be good. Rosario had appeared in her life in careful, measured increments. A phone call the day after the wedding to confirm that Lucia and her apartment were safe. A brief meeting a week later at a hotel downtown, his security apparatus present and her dignity intact, where he had asked her questions professionally as a matter of his investigation. A second meeting which had not been entirely professional, though they had both pretended it was. A third, where neither of them had bothered pretending. He did not tell her what he was in precise terms. She did not ask in precise terms. She was a practical woman who understood that there were rooms in a man's life that required time and trust before the door was opened, and she was not a woman who forced doors. But she also was not a woman who pretended not to see what she saw. "I have something for you," Rosario said, after the ceremony crowd had thinned and Lucia had been redirected diplomatically by Marco, who had developed over 3 months a slightly horrified fondness for her toward the refreshment table. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced an envelope. Rosa opened it. It was a letter of recommendation for the Assistant Director of Events position at the Palazzo Venetian, a position that had opened up 2 weeks ago, that she had not applied for because she had not believed she was qualified for it, that her supervisor Angela had applied for 3 times and not gotten. The letter was on Rosario's personal letterhead. It was 12 lines long. It said, in language that was precise and measured and entirely without sentimentality, that Rosa Elena Delgado was the most observant, competent, and composed professional he had encountered in 30 years of events management, and that any organization that failed to recognize her value was making an error that would be visible only in retrospect. Rosa read it twice. "You did not need to do this," she said. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." She looked up at him. He was looking at her with an expression that she now knew well enough to translate. Not the flat professional assessment she had first encountered in a ballroom, not the carefully structured formality of early acquaintance, but the expression of a man standing in an open place and finding it, against all his prior experience and training, not threatening. "Rosario," she said. It was the first time she had used his first name. She had not planned it. It arrived because it was the right word for the right moment, the way all true things do. He heard it, and something in him settled, the way a thing settles when it has finally been placed correctly after a long time of being in the wrong position. "I was going to ask you something," he said, "but I want to do it properly. Not here. When you are not in a graduation gown, and I have not just—" He stopped. He started again. "I am not good at ordinary things," he said. "I have had very little practice. I may be bad at them for a long time before I am less bad at them." "I know," Rosa said. "I wanted to tell you that first," he said, "before anything else." Rosa looked at him. She thought about her father, who had come to this country with $40 and a refusal to be surprised. She thought about her mother, who had danced in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. She thought about Lucia, on her chair in the 3rd row, cheering at a volume that was almost certainly a violation. She thought about a conference room at 2 in the morning, and a slow song, and a man who had taken her hand because she had asked, and the surprising weight of it. She thought about a woman who had been told repeatedly, and in the language of the ordinary world, that nobody looked at her. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in her pocket, and looked at Rosario Conti. Powerful, guarded, complicated, learning, trying, and said, "I know. I am not in a hurry." She tilted her head slightly. "And just so you know, I am not easy to impress. You are going to have to work at it." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Getting closer. "I have been told," he said, "that I work very hard at things that matter to me." Across the courtyard, Lucia laughed loudly at something Marco had said, and the sound of it carried over the warm Nevada afternoon like something bright and impossible to ignore, the way some things are. Small and ordinary, and entirely unmistakably alive. Rosa Elena Delgado, 43 years old, 14 credits earned, squeaky cartwheel finally fixed, stood in the afternoon light and thought, okay then. Not every love story begins in a ballroom. Some of them begin in a service corridor, with a cart with a broken wheel and a 3-inch gap in a door, and a woman who was told her whole life that nobody was looking. She had simply kept showing up, kept working, kept her eyes open, and walked, quiet as anything, right into the center of the story.